Evening to all. Am I audible?
You're heard, but some background noise comes.
The screen is seen, ma'am.
Yeah.
A very good evening to all. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Swashini ma'am for giving me this opportunity to speak on this topic and share this virtual dais or workspace with eminent speakers. So the topic for me for today will be the role of lasers and anti-VEGFs in current management of diabetic retinopathy. For the next 15 to 20 minutes, I will be covering the basics of lasers and anti-VEGFs. So introduction to lasers, lasers in PDR and DME, then anti-VEGFs in DME and PDR will be seen in brief. So coming to the lasers basics introduction, there are three different types of lasers: the green laser, the red laser, and the yellow laser, which is currently used for retinal lasers. So coming to the laser delivery modes, with the slit lamp delivery mode, which is the most commonly used mode. Then we have the indirect ophthalmoscope, and finally the endoprobe or the endophotocoagulation, which is used during vitrectomy for vitreous hemorrhage or fractional retinal detachments. So before going to lasers, you should know about the laser safety. So we have three different types of lasers. So for each type of laser, we have a different set of goggles covering that particular wavelength. So you should choose the appropriate goggles when you are there in the laser room. So safety eyewear is must for the assistant, and up to 1 to 2 meter distance from the contact lens, the reflections can be hazardous to the assistant. So laser safety eyewears should be always worn when you are in the laser room. Coming to the lenses which are used for PRP, we have a wide variety of lenses, but the two lenses which give a good balance between the magnification of the image and also field of view will be the Mainstar PRP 165 and the Volk SuperQuad 160. So these two lenses are the ideal lenses to start PRP. Coming to focal laser or grid laser lenses, we have two lenses. In this, the Mainstar focal is the one which is being commonly used. And the grading of laser burns, we have grade 1, 2, 3, 4. So for PRP, we usually choose grade 3 or moderate burns, and for focal or grid laser, we go for grade 1 or light burns. Grade 4 burns should be avoided during PRP as far as possible. They will lead to increased inflammation, macular edema, pain to the patient, and may also cause retinal hemorrhages and sometimes retinal holes. So grade 4 burns should be avoided during the PRP. So what are the factors affecting retinal photocoagulation? Maybe the degree of scattering of the laser, the cortical cataracts, any corneal opacities can hamper the laser process. Again, the absorption of energy by the ocular pigments is also a factor which can affect the retinal photocoagulation. In hypopigmented retina, we might need more energy to do the laser as compared to a hyperpigmented retina. Now, the spot size we choose will be inversely proportional to the burn intensity, whereas the power and exposure time will be directly proportional to the burn intensity we want to achieve. So the indications for lasers in a proliferative diabetic retinopathy will be high risk PDR, and sometimes in early PDR also in one-eye patients we might need to do PRP. So how does PRP help? It converts the hypoxic retina into anoxic retina, reduces the pro-angiogenic cytokines and decreases VEGF expression. It also aids oxygen and nutrient diffusion from the choroidal circulation. So coming to the settings for PRP, number of sittings per eye, we will do 2 to 3 sittings normally. But patients with nephropathy or fluid retention, we might need more sittings, 4 or more, because the fluid retention might aggravate the macular edema in these cases. So should be careful in patients with nephropathy. The spot size we choose for PRP is usually 200 microns per. Power will be around 100 to 400 milliwatts. So this will again vary based on the density of the cataract and media haziness. If there is a dispersed VH or a dense cataract, we might need to increase the power to 600, 700 or 800. And duration of laser will be on an average around 150 milliseconds. And interval you can keep either off or a variable interval between 150 to 500 milliseconds based on the skill or experience of the surgeon or the physician doing the laser. The spacing will be one burn with tapered. So normally for each eye we choose 3 sittings, 800 to 1000 spots each sitting. The duration will be 150 milliseconds. Spot size will be 200 microns, and the energy will be 150 to 200 milliwatts to start with, and then you can titrate the energy based on the media density. How far do you need to do laser? So anteriorly up to or beyond the equator, posteriorly 2 disc diameters from the fovea, nasal 1 disc diameter from the disc, and temporally also 2 disc diameter from the fovea. And if there are any tractional bands of fibrovascular proliferations in the retina, we should stay 2 disc diameters away from the fibrovascular bands. So these demarcations we should follow during doing PRP. So which quadrant do you do laser first? Is the inferior quadrant, which is done first, followed by and the temporal quadrant will be the last. If there is a vitreous hemorrhage, most of the time the vitreous hemorrhage will accumulate in the inferior vitreous cavity. So the inferior retina may not be visible in those patients. So we can do accessible PRP in whichever quadrant the retina is visible, and then subsequently as the vitreous hemorrhage clears, we can do in the inferior retina. Some patients might need additional PRP during the follow-up. So in those cases, you have to do laser between the previous laser marks, or you have to go beyond the equator using LIO or Pascal laser mode, which we'll see subsequently. So what does a good response to PRP mean? You can see in the regressing new vessels, if there was a vitreous hemorrhage, it will be resolving on the follow-up. The disc might show some failure in the follow-up. So these patients who are responding to PRP can be followed up every 3 to 6 months with good systemic control. On the other hand, inadequate response to PRP in those patients, we might see new NVs or NDDs developing. The vitreous hemorrhage might be non-resolving, and there might be new vitreous hemorrhage despite previous laser being done. So these patients will need additional PRP along with good systemic controls. Some patients might benefit from added anti-VEGFs, and vitrectomy may be required in some of the patients. So coming to LIO, this is another mode of laser delivery. So previously we were talking about slit lamp delivery modes. So in LIO, this will be useful for immediate post-op patients, patients with diffuse vitreous hemorrhage or dense cataract in cases of poor mydriasis, and patients who cannot sit on the slit lamp. The settings will be 1,000 spots per sitting, as like in a slit lamp mode. Duration is same, and energy also again can be titrated based on the need. However, there is one difference. There is no spot size adjustment in LIO. There is a fixed spot size which is delivered through the LIO. So what are the newer laser technologies which is available for PDR? We have the Pascal laser from Topcon. So what is the difference here from the conventional single spot laser? Here multiple laser burns can be given simultaneously in a predetermined sequence. And you can see here grid of 5x5 or 6x6 can be given so at a single shot you can give 25 to 36 spots, and duration of laser is 10 to 30 milliseconds compared to 150 milliseconds for the conventional single spot laser. So this will cause less collateral damage to the retina. So there will be uniform laser burns, and the precision of the spot placement will be maintained in case of a Pascal or a multi-spot laser. So this also reduces pain to the patient, and the treatment duration for sitting of laser will be reduced from 30 minutes for a conventional slit lamp single spot laser to around 5 to 6 minutes per sitting in case you are using a multi-spot laser delivery system. So here is a picture showing difference between your conventional single spot laser and Pascal. On the right side you can see the Pascal laser spots which are more uniform and homogeneous, whereas on the left side you can see heterogeneous and non-uniform laser marks from a single spot conventional laser. So is there any drawback for Pascal laser? Yes, the drawback is we need increased spot numbers in comparison to conventional single spot laser. So studies have shown that in high risk PDR, Pascal is less effective in controlling new vessels when equal number of spots are applied compared to the traditional lasers. So if we go 1,000 laser spots are needed in conventional single spot laser, we'll need almost 1900 to 2000 equivalent number of spots in a Pascal laser. So other multi-spot lasers available is Iridex has, the Jericho has, and the Zeiss also has their multi-spot laser systems. Another laser system which is new is the Navilus or the navigated laser system. It is a fundus camera based laser system. The computer based laser treatment planning using infrared, color and fluorescent angiographies. So there is a safety or eye tracking system which will minimize inadvertent laser applications, especially in aerophobia. Anytime there is eye movement, the laser will stop immediately to prevent any inadvertent injury to the fovea. So it's also very comfortable to the patient. So complications of lasers, most of the patients in long term will have a decreased contrast, color vision loss or decreased dark adaptation. Acutely, the patients might have macular edema or exudative RD, especially if you give excessive number of spots in a single sitting or you give heavy burns or grade 4 burns. This macular edema and exudative RD can be seen, and in patients with fluid retention or nephropathy, as I mentioned earlier, these complications can be sometimes seen. Another complication can be inadvertent foveal burns. Another complication is the fibrovascular proliferation contraction. So as I told, we should stay 2 disc diameter away from any fibrovascular proliferation whenever I am doing PRP. Otherwise, there is a chance of progression of fractional retinal detachment in those cases. Coming to lasers used in diabetic macular edema, we have the grid laser or the focal laser. So focal laser will act directly on the leaking microaneurysms and it will improve the function of the inner blood retinal barrier, whereas the grid laser works by improvement of function of the malfunctioning RPE pump. So it will improve the functioning of the outer blood retinal barrier. So the treatment technique of focal laser involves spot size of 50 to 100 microns, 100 millisecond duration, and grade 1 burns. So conventional grid also, the settings are almost same as the focal grid laser, but here we give 3 or 4 rows of C-shaped laser temporal to the fovea, starting 500 micron from the center of the fovea. So in conventional grid, this grid pattern or C pattern of laser is given both in the areas of retinal edema as well as areas where there is no retinal thickening on OCT. So there is another mode of laser delivery for macular edema. It's known as the modified grid photocoagulation. In comparison to the conventional grid, here the grid pattern is applied only to the areas where there is retinal edema, and along with that we can combine focal coagulation of the leaking visible microaneurysms. So this is modified grid photocoagulation, which is now being commonly used in most of the patients. So we have newer subthreshold laser technologies for DME. So this is the micropulse laser by Aridex or Vitra. So this mode, the laser energy is divided into numerous short repetitive pulses. So the pulse duration is 100 to 300 microseconds with the resting period interval of 1700 to 1900 microseconds. So the length of these pulses are shorter than the thermal relaxation time of the target tissue. So this will prevent any damage to the tissue. So the duty cycle of the laser is reduced to 5 to 10% of the conventional laser. Another subthreshold laser delivery mode is the endpoint management in TopCon. So here what you do, we look for a barely visible burn outside the arcade, and that is taken as 100% burn. Whatever energy is required for that 100% burn, barely visible burn, 30% of this energy is then used to do laser over the macula. So these subthreshold lasers act by production of something known as heat shock protein 70. So in this picture you can see if you use 100% energy, the heat shock proteins are produced outside the RPE cells, whereas if you use 30% energy, the heat shock proteins are produced within the RPE cells, and these heat shock proteins have anti-inflammatory and also anti-apoptotic functions. So they help in improving the functioning of the RPE cells. So which DME do you treat with laser? Mostly the non-center involving DME we can treat with laser. What about center involving DME? In those cases also, if there is a leak outside the center of the macula, we can laser those leaks, and also may combine laser along with intravitreal injections in these patients. So is there any role of laser in the era of intravitreal anti-VEGFs and steroids? So studies have shown that in DRCR.net study, they have compared IVTA with laser photocoagulation for DME. So over 2 years, they have found that focal or grid photocoagulation is more effective and has fewer side effects than 1 milligram or 4 milligram doses of preservative-free IVTA. Also, continued benefit of the laser has been found in DRCR.net K protocol, for 16 weeks after focal or grid laser for DME in eyes with a definite reduction initial but not complete resolution. Those eyes, up to 23 to 60% of the eyes, are likely to continue to improve further without any additional treatment. Also, these lasers can reduce the anti-VEGF need, as was found in the READ-2 study, where ranibizumab monotherapy was combined with a laser plus ranibizumab therapy. In that study, at the end of 2 years, in the combination group, the number of injections required are 4.9 injections, whereas in the monotherapy group, the number of injections were 9.3. Coming to the anti-VEGFs in DME, so the vascular endothelial growth factor, there are 5 different types. So VEGF is involved in angiogenesis. There are various forms of VEGF-A, of which the VEGF-165 is the pathologic isoform. So coming to the VEGF receptors, there are 3 different types of receptor, type 1, 2, 3, of which type 2 is the one which mediates the angiogenic pathway. So the available anti-VEGFs, we have the pegaptinib, which was initially approved for intravitreal use in 2004, followed by bevacizumab, and then ranibizumab and aflibercept are in use. So bevacizumab is a humanized monoclonal full-length antibody, and it was approved by FDA for metastatic colorectal cancer. However, for intraocular use, it's being used as an off-label drug for more than a decade now. It is now included in the WHO essential drug list for ocular indications since 2016, and also was approved by DCGI in 2016 as an off-label drug for intravitreal injection. So dose is 1.25 milligram, and they come in 100 milligram 4 ml vial from Roche, and it has to be allocated into individual syringes prior to injection. Coming to the next drug, is ranibizumab. It's a recombinant Fab fragment, and it binds all biologically active isoforms of VEGF-A. So what the advantages of ranibizumab or bevacizumab is, it is affinity matured, so it has increased binding for VEGF-A. Also, it is immunized, and the induction of antibodies against is reduced as compared to bevacizumab. It's smaller in size, so it helps to penetrate all retinal layers. It was FDA approved in 2006 for CNVM, and the dose is 0.5 milligram in 0.05 ml. Next drug we have is the aflibercept, which was FDA approved for CNVM in 2011. Structurally, it contains domain 2 of VEGF-R1 receptor and domain 3 of VEGF-R2 receptor. It has 200-fold higher binding affinity for VEGF than ranibizumab. It also penetrates all layers of the retina. The dose is 2 milligram. A similar drug which was approved in China is the Convercept. It contains the extracellular domain 2 of VEGF receptor 1 and domain 3 as well as 4 of VEGF receptor 2. The dose is 0.5 milligram or 2 milligram. So difference between Convercept and aflibercept is the structural difference. In addition to domain 3 of VEGF receptor 2, Convercept also contains the domain 4 of VEGF receptor 2. So it is essential for receptor dimerization, and it enhances the association rate of VEGF to the receptor. So we have various biosimilars of bevacizumab and ranibizumab in the market. So what are the biosimilars? They are similar to existing approved biologics. There are no significant differences in quality, effectiveness, or safety when compared with their approved reference biologics. So bevacizumab biosimilars, there are few of them are there in the India market, like Zyvex, Sizumab, Bevatas, and we have Resumab as the biosimilar for ranibizumab. However, these biosimilars are not approved by DCGI or FDA for intravitreal use. So legally, you are not allowed to use this for intravitreal injections. The drug which is DCGI approved for intravitreal injection is a biosimilar of ranibizumab, that is the Resumab, and it comes in 10 mg per ml vial, and the dose is 0.05 ml. So coming to use of anti-VEGFs in DME, since 2012, ranibizumab was the first anti-VEGF FDA approved for DME. Since then, the anti-VEGFs have become currently the gold standard for treatment of DME. So ranibizumab has been studied widely for DME in the various DRCR.net and RISE and RIDE trials. As you can see here, in the RISE and RIDE trials, the number of patients gaining more than 15 letters is more in both the studies as compared to sham injections. Next, the aflibercept has been studied in the VISTA and VIVID trials for DME. Here also you can see the number of patients gaining more than 15 letters is more in the aflibercept group compared to the laser group. So both these drugs have been studied extensively, and their safety and efficacy has been established in treatment of DME. So we'll just see a few important DRC and NET protocols in relation to management of DME or PDR. So first one is the protocol I. Here have they compared the anti-VEGF, that is ranibizumab, with laser, prompt laser or deferred laser versus steroid, the IVTA, along with laser versus sham injections plus laser. So what was the outcome of the study? At the end of 2 years, they found that visual acuity outcome was better in the ranibizumab groups, both prompt and deferred laser, compared to the steroid group. CMT reduction was, however, same in both the groups. However, in eyes with pseudophakia, the triamcinolone and the ranibizumab groups had equal visual acuity outcomes. So in pseudophakic eyes, the patients, there is a contradiction for anti-VEGF use. We can go for intravitreal steroids in patients who are pseudophakic. So is there a study which is comparing the anti-VEGFs in DME? So it's a protocol T which compares use of ranibizumab, bevacizumab, and aflibercept, their efficacy in treating diabetic macular edema. So in this study, they found that at the end of 1 year and 2 years, the patients who are having visual acuity of in the range from 20/32 to 20/40. So the outcome, visual acuity outcome, is almost same in all the 3 groups at the end of 1 year as well as 2 years. However, in patients who have worse visual acuity, worse than or less than 20/50 or worse, the outcome was better in the group which had received aflibercept, both at 1 year and at the end of 2 years. So next study is the protocol B. So it studies whether there is a role of anti-VEGFs in center involving DME with good visual acuity of 6/9 or better. So what they have found here, they have compared aflibercept versus laser versus observation. And at the end of 2 years, they found that all the three groups had almost equivalent outcomes in terms of mean visual acuity and central subfield thickness change. So the conclusion was that it's better to observe patients with central enrolling DME and good visual acuity. Only if the visual acuity worsens, we can go for any of the interventions, either laser or anti-VEGFs. So what about the anti-VEGFs in proliferative diabetic retinopathy? That has been studied in Protocol S, where ranibizumab has been compared with PRP. So here the 5-year outcome of Protocol S has shown that the mean change in visual acuity is almost same in both the groups. However, in the ranibizumab group, the fewer patients had developed center involving DME and retinal detachment. And in the PRP group, the number of visits and injections were less compared to the injection group. So other findings in the study, in both the groups, eyes without PDR, eyes with regress NV, eyes with active NV are almost same in both the groups. However, tractional retinal detachment was more in the group who had received PRP, and vitreous hemorrhage again was similar in both the groups. So they have concluded that both PRP and ranibizumab injections are good options for treatment of PDR with similar results at 5 years. However, patient-specific factors, including anticipated visit compliance, whether the patient can afford the injections, the cost factor, and frequency of visits should be considered, and it should be individualized for each patient, and then you should decide on whether to use laser or injections, ranibizumab injections in patients with PDR. What are the newer anti-VEGF drugs? We have the latest drug, which is the brolucizumab, which was launched, FDA approved in 2019 in the USA, and then 2020 February it was FDA approved in Europe. So it is the smallest molecule available now. Its molecular weight is 26 kilodalton. So what is the advantage is it's given initial 3 monthly injections of 6 milligram per dose, and followed by every 2 to 3 months injections. So on a molar basis, 6 milligram of brolucizumab is equivalent to 12 times 2 milligram dose of aflibercept and 22 times the 0.5 milligram dose of ranibizumab. The smaller molecular weight and the high drug concentration leads to slower clearance of the drug from the vitreous cavity. So thus it helps in prolonging the duration of actions. Comparatively, all other anti-VEGFs, most of the time you have to inject monthly. However, this drug can be injected at the gap of 2 to 3 months. However, immediately after the launch of this drug in USA, within 3 months, some side effects were noted related to intraocular inflammation or retinal vasculitis. So this retinal vasculitis and intraocular inflammation are similar to vancomycin related HORV or hemiretinal vasculitis, which was seen following vancomycin injections. Another thing, so it was considered as a delayed type hypersensitivity, which this reaction was seen almost a month after the initial injections. So another theory is that this could be due to aggravated retinal ischemia, which is causing the retinal or retinal vascular occlusions. So these phase 4 trials are now underway, studying the safety and efficacy of brolucizumab. So once the studies results are out, we can further conclude whether they can be used routinely in the place of other anti-VEGF medication, intravitreal drugs. So another drug, it's not a newer drug, it's there in the market for a long time, but it's used mainly for metastatic colorectal carcinoma. So it's not FDA approved or BCGI approved for intravitreal use. It's being used intravitreally as an off-label drug by some practitioners. Only reason is it's cost effective, similar to bevacizumab. So one injection of aflibercept will cost more than 50,000, whereas this Xeltrap comes in a 4 ml vial, which can be reconstituted and used for up to 30 patients, and each vial costs around 30,000. So per injection, the cost is reduced to almost 1,000 rupees for the patient. However, there are some problems with aflibercept. The osmolarity is very high, 1000 milliosmol, compared to aflibercept, which is only 300 milliosmol. So studies have shown that intravitreal injections of hyperosmolar solutions more than 500 milliosmol may irreversibly damage the RPE. So we have only some short-term studies on aflibercept, up to 6 month studies, which have shown no abnormalities on ERG or macular microperimetric testing with a dose of 1.25 milligram. But however, long-term studies are still awaited, and also the approval is still needed for us to use it in our routine practice. So to summarize, for lasers, we have for PRP the Mainstar 165 of the Bolt super quad lens, and grade 3 burns we should opt for PRP, and we should stay 2 inch diameter away from the fovea or of the FBPs. And we have the newer Pascal or Nebulas, which helps in giving multi-spot and faster laser with less pain to the patient. For grid and focal laser, we should go for grade 1 burns, and non-central involved DME, we should can use grid or focal laser. Also, we can combine with anti-VEGFs, and we have the newer subthreshold micropulse lasers, which act through production of heat shock protein 70. The protocol I, which is studied that ranibizumab and laser is superior to IVTA plus laser in terms of visual acuity outcome. However, in pseudophakic eyes, the visual acuity outcomes are similar in both the groups. In protocol T, we have seen that aflibercept is superior to ranibizumab and bevacizumab in those who have a vision poorer than 20/50. Those with better visual acuity, almost all the 3 drugs had almost similar outcomes in terms of visual acuity. And protocol B has recommended that we should observe central involving DME with good visual acuity better than 6/9. Only when the visual acuity worsens, we should go for either laser or injections. And protocol S has shown that ranibizumab is non-inferior to PRP in treatment of PDR at the end of 5 years in terms of visual acuity outcome. However, we have to individualize the treatment modality for each patient based on their compliance to treatment and also the cost effectiveness, so that they can bear the cost for the injections. Thank you.